Welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at the BQEYZ Summer. So while we wait for all the hot new IEMs to ship and arrive, I had a chance to take a look at one from the recent past, and that would be the Summer. So if you look today on Amazon US, there is a store called Cool Key Hair, and that is BQE's official store on Amazon US, I believe. That's where this one was shipped from, and today it's about $129. But I do want to thank them for the opportunity. This is actually my second BQEYZ, but the first one was a long time ago, so I'm very happy to have the opportunity to work with them. So here it is, kind of up close. We won't spend a ton of time looking at these as they've been out for quite a while, but there it is in blue. You can kind of see through the shell. There's a big 13mm dynamic driver. There is a BA, which you can kind of not really see, and there's also a 5-layer piezo in there, which you can't really see either, but trust me, they are there. So on the side of it, it says Summer. Nice metal nozzles. The cable itself is a 8-core SPC, so actually quite nice, pretty much appropriate for the price, so I got no complaints there. It's actually quite nice compared to other stock cables that I've seen in the recent past. So again, thank them for sending that one to me. So I think where we're actually going to start is where I sort of finished off in one of my recent videos, and that was with the Hadiz MM2. And I say that because these two kind of shot for the same signature. So you've got this bassy carry in quite a lot of mid bass, lower end, a bit thick, bottom out into the mids, and then pop up again into your lower treble. And both these sets essentially do the same thing, except that Summer, probably did what I said Hadiz should have done, and you've got to lower this level a little bit, because on the balance, even the balance setting on the MM2, a little bit too much, and this one again was a little bit too much on the balance setting as well, or on the tuning filter on that as well. So I think BQEYZ took a kind of better approach to this style signature, plus they extended on the treble. So I think generally I would call these two similar. They kind of shot in the same direction, probably a slightly better implementation by Summer, considering that they also have a big 13mm dynamic driver handling this bit, and then a BA and then piezo handling that set. So you do get quite a little bit of a bonus detail that you don't get in the MM2 simply by using a hybrid tribrid configuration. So yeah, I think when I first listened to them, I kind of thought they were a bit same, or at least starting off in the same place, and a little bit later we'll kind of talk about where they diverged a little bit. So as I said, this one does have a unique driver configuration. It's a 13mm dynamic driver, one BA, and one 5-layer piezo, which does lead to a lack of coherence in treble. At this price point, it's super difficult to get 3 very different drivers to sound as one. And I think in this style and at this price point, I sort of like this sound of hybrids. It reminds me more of a hybrid that you would see at a lower cost, because the two drivers sort of stick out a bit. You get a little more separation in instruments and frequency ranges, and that it's going to offend some people, and some people like me, it becomes a unique sound, something that I'm very familiar with, and kind of the budget hybrid sound. So I don't mind it at all, but do be aware that this isn't 3 perfectly tuned sounding as one drivers. They definitely have separation between all 3, so slight lack of coherence there. And I would say that that's probably price appropriate for putting those 3 together at $129. I'm not sure that anyone's going to do that much of a better job at smashing those 3 into one shell and making them coherent. So for tips, do pick your poison. As I said, this thing has a little bit of boom to it. So these bass levels are actually kind of high. So some people say you can tip roll it and it doesn't really sound like it. I don't necessarily agree with that, but be really careful with trying to reduce this part and emphasizing that part. That will put you in a different place, and that's somewhere I didn't necessarily want to do that, but I definitely read about people doing that in the past. So what does it sound like? It's got this bassy on the bottom, so that, as I said, the lower end is just a little bit heavy on the mid bass, and then it's edgy on top because you have so you've got big dynamic driver handling this bit, and then you have BA and piezo handling that. So you end up with maybe BA timbre, piezo timbre. There's a sharpness and edginess to this whole section that doesn't necessarily exist on the lower end, which is a nice, softer, warmer, very nice dynamic driver. So the two sort of meet, and you end up with this half and half. It does lead to what I would call interesting dynamics and contrast and separation, but it sounds a bit thick to thin. So starting all the way in the bass, and then listening to it as you travel through the mids and up through the treble, it goes from a very thicker sound to a very thinner sound by the time you hit the upper piezo side and hitting your cymbals. I think they are on the thin side, the bass is on the little thick side, so it does that kind of travel from thick to thin, in my opinion. But very likable, some real, and I will talk about some real nitpicks at this price. It's $129. This isn't a $49 set, so I was expecting some things to be a little better. Some things don't bother me, but yeah, in general, you have to nitpick it a little bit at $130. So the bass, like I said, it's got this slightly heavy mid-bass presence, and you can't really hide what's going on here. And you can see where my target is, and that's almost a flat U-shape, almost no bleed between the bass and the mids. So they've got a good 5 decibels of energy here that, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily need to be all of that there. They certainly could have ratcheted it back a couple decibels, and I think it would have been just as fine. But much like MM2, you're balancing off these two bits. So this is a little bit too high, and this becomes a little bit too high. And I wish they would just bring them back down a little bit together, and you wouldn't have to have this trade-off of too much mid-bass to balance out your lower treble. So again, this one is a pretty fun quantity, and it sounds quite controlled. It's not super boomy. It's not kind of loose and flabby. There's definitely some rumble there, but it's just missing the details to match the mids and the treble. So as I said, as the BA takes over and the piezo takes over, those have a sharper, edgier sound. And the dynamic driver at 13 millimeters is certainly kind of fast, but not really fast and detailed enough to overcome the quantity that they used. So you end up with some of those details are kind of masked over and missing. And a song like Go Go Penguins Raven, it definitely starts out as a hybrid should, and sounds kind of sharp and detailed. It's kind of nice, detail and speed. And then at 52 seconds, once the drums start, you're like, oh, that's that stupid, too much mid bass. It's just distracting, a little bit overwhelming, especially at a decent volume, just a little bit too much boom. And it's sort of times like that where you're like, I'm not sure what they were really thinking, because it's just quite a bit of mid bass hump there, and I understand what they did, but it's still kind of annoying to hear it on certain songs, and that was one song that was a bit annoying to hear it from. But the new Tom Sawyer, they had like a 40th anniversary deluxe version of Moving Pictures just came out, and that actually sounds fine. And I think the way that track is mastered with the drums and where they are, I think it actually works out quite well on Summer. But as I said, you can tip roll it, but I think if you have too much bass, you're probably better off just lowering the volume a little bit. Definitely, as you ratchet up the volume, that mid bass becomes even bigger and a little bit more boomy. So the mids, starting out with a track like Pearl Jam Indifference, Eddie Vedder's, he's got this kind of lower, there's a very full-bodied sound to that track, especially at the beginning, and it's very likable in that blonde way. If you're familiar with the BL03 and those kind of thick, smoothed over, heavy mids, that's pretty much what you're getting right here with that kind of signature. So the problem with that is it masks a little bit of the dynamics and detail in his voice, and that's why I keep on kind of harping on that level is just a couple decibels too much for a set that costs $129. I think people are going to be expecting something a little more refined, a little more textured, a little more dynamic and detailed, especially at that price. But on the other hand, they ended up, balancing out the timbre, so it actually sounds quite natural. It's just kind of a bit thick, is what I would call it. Then at the other end, Hayley Williams, a track like Simmer or anything by Little Mix, they don't necessarily sound shouty or harsh, but they're pushed in that direction. And then you combine that with the 7 to 8K with a little bit more energy, and there's just occasional sibilance at the tracks from the clarity of their voices. And it's kind of odd, and you can kind of see what happens on the graph on what they're really doing. So this, so especially with Summer, so it pops up a bit early. So that tends to be just a hair shouty. If you are very sensitive to it, that's not really popped up all that much. But you take this, which is leaning, almost in a shouty direction, combined with a 7 to 8K that's really popped, and that gives you a little more sibilance where none should really exist. And these two together kind of work together in a way that was not my favorite way, especially on these higher female vocals. You don't notice at all anything down here. It's only when you really hit instruments, snare drums, and high female vocals in that area where the two don't work together as they should, or maybe as they intended, or as I would prefer it to happen. So, but sort of in the middle, when you're between Eddie Vedder and Little Mix, Summer can do very nice warm mids with nice detail, because they did pop that 4 to 5 area, and that will give you quite a bit of detail, and it actually does sound quite nice. So the treble, like I said, it's kind of a mixed bag. On the lower side, very much that pop is a little high, so this lower bit in the treble, right here for Summer's the blue, a little bit popped above what I would do it. And then the AK, again, has a lot of energy on AK, which it doesn't really need, so that pops out a little bit, especially if you're sensitive to it. Like, I'm a little bit more sensitive to it, but you do get nice extension, and the detail does lead to that hybrid sound. So you get lots of separation and lots of edginess and, kind of sharpness to everything from the mids up through the treble. So quite nice. But a track like Tom Sawyer, this remastered deluxe version, the drums just kind of pop out of place. They don't quite sound natural because they're popping a little bit on one of those peaks. And I will say that a track like Dead Mouse's Strobe, something that probably on a hybrid or on a tribrid should sound razor sharp, not quite hitting where it should here. It's just kind of odd. It just sounds a little bit uneven, a little bit thin, maybe a little bit grainy. Something is going on there. Maybe that's the interaction of the BA handing off to the piezo, or maybe the two are working together. Just slightly off, and that's just a big nitpick there. Not just noticeable, but not something that I would say it's a deal breaker by any means. It's just I was expecting it to be sort of near flawless. That's what a BA can do, that song quite well. A BA and a piezo should actually be able to do it even better. So another nitpick, it can sound a little less airy than I thought it was going to be. And maybe the graph is actually, this is actually true. There is a little trough here as opposed to peaking up at about 15K, which would give you a little bit more air. Maybe there is a actual dip there. It's kind of hard to say. These aren't super accurate here, but yeah, I think in general, because of the heaviness that you hear out here, maybe this is being masked. Maybe it's there and it's just not high enough to hear. But there is sort of a upper treble darkness that I think isn't helped by all this mid bass here. And if you were looking for big airy strings, not necessarily what I would call super airy on this set. So the stage is actually quite good. It has the right width, height, and depth. It's actually quite nice for what's going on, especially at the price, and it never really feels constrained or too small. Nothing is ever really layered and properly. I think it's just quite nice. I think they hit their mark on that at the price point. But, generally, like I was talking about, this BA and the piezo, they have this speed and the separation and layering very, very nice. Sounds great on the stage. Tracks are presented in a really nice fashion that way, but the whole thing would be a lot, I mean, it's not a lot better, but quite a bit better with less bass, just giving you a little bit more clarity, a little bit more spaciousness, and I think it would have sounded a little more price appropriate. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on BQEYZ Summer. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.